Okay, good morning, good week. We're learning Tractate Shabbos, chapter 20. We're completing chapter 20 as we're learning today, and page 143. Start with the Mishnah. The Mishnah cites a dispute concerning the permissibility of removing muktzah remnants from a table. Beis Shammai Emrim, Ma'abirim al shulchan azvus uklipin. We may remove bones and husks from the table by hand. One must take up the entire table board and shake it clean, and not handle the bones and husks directly. That's seemingly we may remove from the table by hand pirurim pochos mikazais, crumbs that are smaller than a kazais, v'seo shelafunim se'ar adoshim, as well as pea pods and lentil pods, mipnei shumaychol beima, because they are fit for use as animal fodder. Having set forth several muktzah laws related to clearing off a table, the Mishnah continues with another law concerning this subject. Sfoig, a sponge. If it has a leather handle, we may wipe a table with it even when it is damp. But if not, we may not wipe a table with it when it is damp. In either case, it may be taken on the Shabbos when it is dry, and it is not susceptible to tumah. The Mishnah cited Beis Shammai as taking a lenient stand concerning muktzah, allowing one to handle bones and husks directly. Beis Hillel is taking a stringent stand in this regard. The Gemara reports a version of the Mishnah that reverses their opinions. We have no reliance on this version of the Mishnah, but rather on the following version, which I heard from my masters. Beis Shammai rule like Rabbi Yehuda, who applies muktzah broadly, and they prohibit direct handling of bones and husks. So Beis Hillel Rabbi Shimon, while Beis Hillel rule like Rabbi Shimon, who does not apply muktzah broadly, and they permit this practice. So the Mishnah should read that Beis Shammai say one must take up the entire table board and shake it clean, whereas Beis Hillel say we may remove bones and husks from the table by hand. The Mishnah continued, we may remove from the table crumbs that are smaller than a kazais. Mishnah is the support of Rabbi Yochanan. Crumbs that are smaller than a kazais may not be destroyed manually. Rather, they must be treated as in a manner befitting food remnants. Respectful, befitting food remnants. The Mishnah supports this rule since it implies that the crumbs may be removed from the table but may not be discarded. Se'or shelafunin, we may remove from the table pea pods and lentil pods because they are fit for use as animal fodder. The Gemara analyzes this ruling and contrasts it with the Mishnah's later ruling. Mani, who is the Tana whose opinion this reflects? Rabbi Shimon, he delays the muktzah. The ruling is reflective of the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who does not accept a broad application of muktzah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, however, the pods are muktzah ema seifa, but consider the latter clause of the Mishnah. Sfoig, a sponge, if it has a handle, we may wipe a table with it, but if it doesn't have a handle, we may not wipe the table with it. Presumably, the reason this is forbidden is that while grasping the sponge, one might inadvertently squeeze out some water. Ason Rabbi Yehuda, in this segment of the Mishnah, we have arrived at the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who said that something that is unintended is prohibited. Rabbi Shimon, however, permits doing an act that might unintentionally result in the violation of a prohibition. How could the Mishnah have stated two consecutive rulings that reflects the the views of conflicting Tanoim. Beho, in this case of wiping a table with a sponge that has no handle, even Rabbi Shimon concedes that it is prohibited. For Abai and Rava both said, Rabbi Shimon agrees that an act is forbidden where its forbidden consequence is inevitable. The Gemara discusses the muktzah status of another item that is normally used as fodder. Honi gar'inin the samra moyoso. The pits of Armenian dates, which are commonly fed to animals, it is permitted to move them on Shabbos since they were fit for use as fodder along with their mothers, which means the date themselves at the onset of Shabbos. But the pits of Persian dates may not be moved on Shabbos, since at the onset of Shabbos the dates, including the pits, had been set aside for human consumption. Gemara cites a permissible method of removing muktzah pits from one's presence. Shmuel would move them on top of a piece of bread. A memory aid is provided. Sharnam Shapaz Siman. Sharnam Shapaz is a mnemonic. Sharnam Shapaz is a mnemonic for the names of several sages who devised permissible ways of discarding date pits. The Gemara digresses to explain how Shmuel could have used bread for a purpose other than eating. A person may use bread for all his needs. One may use bread even to transport date pits. So he transferred the pits together with the bread. The Gemara now cites the method by which other sages discarded date pits. Rava would move them, the date pits, along with a bucket of water. Ravuna, the son of Yehuda, would pile them up to make them repulsive, like a vessel of excrement. He then relied upon the dispensation for removing a vessel of excrement from one's presence. The latter practice is rejected. Amar Ravashi said to Almeima, but may we purposefully create a situation similar to a vessel of excrement? No! Exclamation mark. And by making a pile of pits, the conditions of this dispensations are being purposefully created. The Gemara cites the practice of sages who sought to completely avoid the necessity to move the pits after their removal. Rav Sheshes would toss them beyond the table with his tongue. Rav Papa would toss them behind the couch upon which he was reclining. Al Rabbi Zechar ben Avkulas, they said about Zechar ben Avkulas, who would turn his face behind the couch upon which he was reclining and toss the pits there. Adon Aloch Noito, we should return to you Noite.
You remember when watermelon used to have pits in them?
Yeah, of course.
And then so on Shabbos you would eat the watermelon.
And still till this very day you can buy watermelon with...
Where? I don't know where, but okay. I'm just saying I remember that, and I always thought about that when I was learning something like this.
How they can replant...
They do this genetically modified stuff.
So we're starting chapter 22, and this chapter is called Chavis. Okay? Chavis is a cask, a barrel. Chavis shenishburo, cask that has broken. Matzil men wasn't sure so we may save from it on Shabbos enough meals, provisions for 3 meals. And you can tell other people, come and save for yourself some wine for yourself, but provided that he does not sponge up the spilled wine, since he may be led to squeeze it from the sponge, which is forbidden. So I guess it's dealing with a cask of wine.
Stuff like
I don't know how you say. It calls it meals, so it might be food, and then might be also wine.
Make a kiddush.
Yeah, kiddush for 3 meals, and you can tell others go save also, hoping that they would give it to him and give it back to him.
Or at least they wouldn't waste it.
We may not squeeze fruits on Shabbos to extract liquid from them. And even if the liquids oozed from the fruits on the Shabbos of their own accord, they are prohibited for consumption on the Shabbos. By rabbinic decree, for the rabbis fear that permitting this liquid might lead one to squeeze the fruits, which is forbidden. If one originally stored the fruits for eating, the liquid that oozed from them is permitted. For since one does not intend these fruits for squeezing, it will not lead to squeeze them. But if one originally stored the fruits for liquid, like some oranges or for juice, not for eating, the liquid that oozes from them is prohibited, lest using it lead one to squeeze the fruits. Honeycombs were chopped before the Shabbos, and honey then oozed from them on Shabbos of its own accord. It is prohibited for consumption on that Shabbos. Rabbi Elazar permits one to consume it. Tana lo yispeg b'yayin, one should not sponge up spilled wine on the Shabbos, lest one come to squeeze the wine from the sponge. Maybe he wants to go on for another round. V'lo yitpach b'shemen, one should not moisten one's hand with spilled oil. It's like anointing yourself with oil on Shabbos, in order to return to its vessel, so that one will not do on the Shabbos as one does on the weekday. If one's food became scattered in a courtyard, melaket al yad ve'echel, one may gather them a little at a time and eat them as one gathers them. But one should not gather them into a basket or into a box, so that one will not do on the Shabbos as one does on the weekday. And so we may not squeeze fruits on the Shabbos to extract liquids from them. In fact, agreed with the sages in the case of liquid that oozed from olives or grapes on the Shabbos. He admits that even if the olives and grapes were stored for eating, the juice that flowed from them is prohibited. For since most olives and grapes are designated for squeezing, one will often change one's mind upon seeing juice flow from them, and it will designate for squeezing fruits that were originally stored for eating. We therefore fear that allowing one to use the juice of these fruits could lead one to unthinkingly squeeze them on the Shabbos. Rabbi disagreed with the sages even in the case of liquid that oozed from olives or grapes. So Rabbi Yehuda holds a liquid they exude is prohibited only if they were stored for squeezing, but if they were stored for eating, it is permissible.
I think it's exude.
Exude. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda holds that the liquid they exude is prohibited only if they were stored for squeezing, but if they were stored for eating, it is permissible. A third Amoraik statement of Rabbi Yochanan, Halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda in the case of liquid that oozed from other sorts of fruits on the Shabbos. If the fruits were stored for eating, one may consume the liquid. Halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda in the case of liquid that oozed from olives and grapes. Even if the olives and grapes were stored for eating, one may not consume the liquid they exuded. A fourth statement, Rabbi Yehuda agreed with the sages in the case of liquid that oozed from olives and grapes on the Shabbos. And the sages agree with Rabbi Yehuda in the case of liquid that oozed from other sorts of food. So what is the machlekes? In what case do they disagree? When you will study the matter, you will find in what case they disagree. It is probable that they disagree in the case of liquid that oozed from mulberries and pomegranates. The Tanya, it was taught in a Baisa's Eidim, Shemoshachem Shem, Vanovim Shemoshachem Yain, olives from which oil oozed on the Shabbos, and grapes from which wine oozed on the Shabbos. Whether one had originally stored them for food or whether one had stored them for liquid, ayotzim, and also the liquid that oozed from them is prohibited for consumption. However, in the case of mulberries from which liquid oozed, or pomegranates from which wine oozed, if one had originally stored them for eating, so the liquid that oozed from them is permissible for consumption. But if one had stored them for liquid, for squeezing, or for no stated purpose, also the liquid that oozed from them is prohibited. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. But the sages says, and also whether one had originally stored them for food or whether one had stored them for liquid, the liquid that oozed from them is prohibited. We see from this paisa that Rabbi Yehuda's disagreement with the sages concerns liquid that oozed on the Shabbos from mulberries or pomegranates. Rabbi Yehuda holds that if the fruits were originally stored for eating, the liquid is permissible for consumption. The sages prohibited even in this case. The Gemara will now focus on one point in Rabbi Yehuda's ruling in this paisa and will demonstrate that it is an apparent contradiction with a ruling set forth in a Mishnah elsewhere. The Gemara accordingly asks, "Sova Rabbi Yehuda stam also," but then does Rabbi Yehuda truly hold that when one stored mulberries or pomegranates for no stated purpose, it is forbidden to consume the juice that oozes from them on the Shabbos? We have learned otherwise in the following Mishnah. The milk of a woman will cause susceptibility to tuma, whether its emergence is to one's satisfaction or is not to one's satisfaction, for it is legally considered a beverage in either case. Milk of an animal will only cause susceptibility to tuma if its emergence is to one's satisfaction, since only in that case does it have legal status as a beverage. This is the opinion of the sages. Rabbi Akiva disputed the sages and said, but it is known through the following kal v'chomer that animal milk is equivalent to a human milk in this regard, that even if one was not satisfied with its emergence, it is nonetheless considered a beverage and will cause susceptibility to tuma. For if we find in the case of the milk of a woman, which is intended only for children, that it will cause susceptibility to tuma, whether its emergence was to one's satisfaction or was it not to one's satisfaction. Then in the case of animal milk, which is intended for both children and adult, is it not logical that it should cause susceptibility to tumah, irregardless of whether its emergence was to one's satisfaction or whether it was not to one's satisfaction? Amulei, the sages said to him, what comparison can be made between the milk of a woman and the milk of an animal? For if the Torah designated as a cause of susceptibility to tumah the milk of a woman that did not emerge to one's satisfaction, insofar as the blood of her wound causes susceptibility to tumah. Will it likewise designate as a cause of susceptibility to tumah the milk of an animal?
I don't understand where we're getting into the blood of her wound. I mean, talking about if she's out, are you going to need it? I don't know. Where did this...
1 second. So it says, Shelo l'rotzen, that did not emerge to one's satisfaction. When the blood of its wound does not cause susceptibility to tumah. Certainly not, for the only reason, now he explains it here, for the only reason, you see it?
Yeah.
That a woman's milk that emerged unintentionally is legally considered a beverage is because it is like the blood of her wound, which has beverage status even though she is not generally desirous of its coming forth. The blood of an animal's wound, by contrast, is not considered a beverage altogether. Its milk will therefore not be considered a beverage unless its owner is content with its having come forth. So really what they're saying is that if the blood is considered a beverage, whether you like it or not, whether you like it coming out or you don't, the milk would be considered a beverage. But if the blood is not a beverage, like with animal, then the milk is not going to be considered a beverage unless that was your intention. You wanted it to come out.
So a cow, you want the milk from the cow.
So this all goes back to the juice oozing from foods. If you have a desire for it to come out, or you don't have a desire for it to come out. Like you put mulberries, pomegranates.
How about you go to Winn-Dixie? You ever get those fruit things that you like? They're $3 or $5. The watermelon and the cantaloupe and the honeydew and the cut up fruit. So by the time you get to it on Shabbos, they got a juice on the bottom. Right. So what are we going to say? That juice is not? I can't see where that could be aser.
Oh yeah, to see the halacha. This is now seeing the different opinions of what.
I mean, it's